Hi, my name is The Reading Bookshelf, and I would like to start a new series on this channel. It's I'm not sure what I'm gonna call it, but basically it's story time, and I'm gonna read sections and chapters of books that I have. And today we are going to be starting with Vanity Fair, which is about a social satire on English society during the Napoleonic Wars, which was around the middle of the 1800s. So that's the backdrop for this. And today we are going to be starting with chapter 1. So Vanity Fair, just a preface, is about the journey of two women named Becky Sharp and Amelia Sedley after they leave Miss Pinkerton's academy, which is basically like their high school prep school. But first, we have to start at Miss Pinkerton's academy in the first chapter called Cheswick Mall. There's Cosily. Okay. Chapter 1. Cheswick Mall. While the present century was in its teens, and one shiny morning in June, there drove up to the iron gate of Miss Pinkerton's Academy for Young Ladies on Cheswick Mall a large family coach with two fat horses with blazing harness driven by a fat coachman in a three-cornered hat and wig, and at a rate of 4 miles an hour. A black servant who reposed on the box beside the fat coachman uncurled his bandy legs as soon as the equipage drew up opposite Miss Pinkerton's shiny brass plate, and as he pulled the bell, at least a score of young heads were seen peering out of the narrow windows of the stately old brick house. Nay, the acute observer might have recognized the little red nose of good-natured Miss Jemima Pinkerton herself, rising over some geranium pots in the window of that lady's own drawing-room. Quote, "It is Mrs. Sedley's coach, sir," said Miss Jemima. Quote, "Sambo, the black servant, has just rung the bell, and the coachman has a new red waistcoat. A new red waistcoat." "Have you completed all the necessary preparations incident to Miss Sedley's departure, Miss Jemima?" asked Miss Pinkerton herself, that majestic lady, the Seramis of Hammersmith, the friend of Dr. Johnson, the correspondent of Miss Chaperone herself. The girls were up at 4 this morning, packing her trunks, sister," replied Miss Jemima. We have made a beau pot." The girls were Sorry, let me say that again. Quote, "Say a bouquet, Sister Jemima, 'tis more genteel." "Well, a bouquet almost as big as a haystack I have put up 2 bottles of the gillyflower water for Mrs. Sedley, and the receipt for making it in Amelia's box." "And I trust, Miss Jemima, that you have a copy of Miss Sedley's account?" This is it, isn't it?" "Very good. £93 4 shillings. Be kind enough to address it to John Sedley, Esquire, and seal this billet which I have written to his lady." In Miss Jemima's eyes, an autograph letter of her sister, Miss Pinkerton, was an object of as deep veneration as would have been a letter from a sovereign. only when her pupils quitted the establishment, or when they were about to get married, or once when poor Miss Birch died of scarlet fever, was Miss Pinkerton known to write personally to the parents of her pupils, and it was Jemima's opinion that if anything could console Mrs. Birch for her daughter's loss, it would be that pious and eloquent composition in which Miss Pinkerton announced the event. In the present instance, Miss Pinkerton's billet was to the following effect: The Mall, Cheswick, June 15th, 18 Opening quote. Madam, after her 6 years of residence at the Mall, I have the honor and happiness of presenting Miss Amelia Sedley to her parents as a young lady not unworthy to occupy a fitting position in their polished and refined circle. Those virtues which characterize the young English gentlewoman, those compliments which become her birth and station, will not be found wanting in the amiable Miss Sedley, whose industry and obedience have endeared her to her instructors, and whose delightful sweetness of temper has charmed her aged and youthful companions. In music, in dancing, in orthography, in every variety of embroidery and needlework, she will be found to have realized her friends' fondest wishes. In geography, there is still much to be desired, and a careful and undeviating use of the backboard for 4 hours daily during the next 3 years is recommended as necessary to the acquirement of that dignified deportment and carriage so requisite for every young lady of fashion. Continuing on. In the principles of religion and morality, Miss Sedley will be found worthy of an establishment which has been honored by the presence of the great lexicographer and the patronage of the admirable Mrs. Chaperon. Sorry, I think I said that wrong a few times. In leaving the Mall, Miss Amelia carries with her the hearts of her companions, the affectionate regards of her mistress, who has the honor to subscribe herself, Madam, your most obliged humble servant, Barbara Pinkerton. P.S. Miss Sharp accompanies Miss Sedley. It is particularly requested that Miss Sharp's stay in Russell Square may not exceed 10 days. The family of distinction with whom she is engaged desire to avail themselves of her services as soon as possible. This letter is completed. Miss Pinkerton proceeded to write her own name and Miss Sedley's in the flyleaf of Johnson's dictionary. The interesting work which she invariably presented to her scholars on their departure from the Mall. On the cover was an inserted copy of, quote, the lines addressed to a young lady acquitting Miss Pinkerton's school at the Mall, by the late revered Dr. Samuel Johnson. End quote. In fact, the lexicographer's name was always on the lips of his majestic woman, and a visit he had paid her was the cause of her reputation and her fortune. Being commanded by her elder sister to get the dictionary from the cupboard, Miss Jemima had extracted 2 copies of the book from the receptacle in question. When Miss Pinkerton had finished the inscription in the first, Jemima, with a rather dubious and timid air, handed her the second. "For whom is this, Miss Jemima?" said Miss Pinkerton with an awful coldness. "For Becky Sharp," answered Jemima, trembling very much and blushing over her withered face and neck as she turned her back on her sister. "For Becky Sharp. She's going too." "Miss Jemima!" exclaimed Miss Pinkerton, in the largest capital letters. "Are you in your senses? Replace the dictionary in the closet, and never venture to take such a liberty in future." "Well, sister, it's only 2 and 9 pence, and poor Becky will be miserable if she doesn't get one." "Send Miss Sedley instantly to me," said Miss Pinkerton, and so, venturing not to say another word, poor Jemima trotted off, exceedingly flurried and nervous. Miss Sedley's papa was a merchant in London and a man of some wealth, whereas Miss Sharp was an articuled pupil, for whom Miss Pinkerton had done, and, as she thought, quite enough without conferring upon her imparting the high honor of the dictionary. Although the schoolmistress's letters are to be trusted no more nor less than the church epitaphs, yet as it sometimes happens that a person departs this life who is really deserving of all the praises the stonecutter carves over his bones, who is a good Christian, a good parent, child, wife, or husband, who actually does leave a disconsolate family to mourn his loss, so in his academies of the male and female sex, it occurs every now and then that the pupil is fully worthy of the praises bestowed upon the disinterested instructor. Now, Miss Amelia Sedley was a young lady of this singular species, and deserved not only of all that Miss Pinkerton said in her praise, but had many charming qualities, which that pompous old Minerva of a woman could not see, from the differences of rank and age between her pupil and herself. For she could not only sing like a lark, or a Mrs. Billington, and dance like a Hillisberg or a Parasol, and embroider beautifully, and spell as well as a dictionary itself, but she had such a kindly, smiling, tender, gentle, generous heart of her own, as won the love of everybody who came near her, from Minerva herself down to the poor girl in the scullery, the one-eyed tart woman's daughter, who permitted to vend her wares once a week to the young ladies in the mall. She had 12 intimate and bosom friends out of the 24 young ladies. Even envious Miss Briggs never spoke ill of her. High and mighty Miss Saltire, Lord Dexter's granddaughter, allowed that her figure was genteel, and as for Miss Schwartz, the rich woolly-haired mulatto from St. Kitts, on the day Amelia went away, she was in such a passion of tears that they were obliged to send for Dr. Floss, and half tipsify her with sal volatile. Miss Pinkerton's attachment was, as may be supposed from the high position and eminent virtues of that lady, calm and dignified. But Miss Jemima had already whimpered several times at the idea of Amelia's departure, and before fear of her sister would have gone off in downright hysterics like the heiress, who paid double of St. Kitts. Such luxury of grief, however, is not allowed to parlor boarders. Honest Jemima had all the bills and the washing and the mending and the puddings and the plate and the crockery and the servants to superintend. But why speak about her? It is improbable that we shall not hear of her again from this moment to the end of time, and that when the great fliggery iron gates were once closed on her, she and her awful sister will never issue therefrom into this little world of history. Excuse me. But as we are to see a great deal of Amelia, there is no harm in saying, at the outset of our acquaintance, that she was a dear little creature, and a great mercy it is, both in life and in novels, and the latter especially, abound in villains of the most somber sort, that we are to have for a constant companion so guileless and good-natured a person. As she is not a heroine, there is no need to describe her person. Indeed, I am afraid that her nose was rather short than otherwise, and her cheeks a great deal too round and red for a heroine. But her face blushed with rosy health, and her lips with the freshest of smiles. She had a pair of eyes which sparkled with the brightest and honestest good humor, except indeed when they were filled with tears, and that was a great deal too often. For the silly thing would cry over a dead canary bird, or over a mouse that a cat had happily seized upon, or over the end of a novel, were it ever so stupid. As for saying an unkind word to her, were any person so hard-hearted to do so? Why, so much for the worse for them. Even Miss Pinkerton, that austere and godlike woman, ceased scolding her after the first time, and though she had more comprehended sensibility than she did algebra, gave all masters and teachers particular orders to treat Miss Sedley with the utmost gentleness, as harsh punishment was injurious to her. So when the day of the departure came, between her two customs of laughing and crying, Miss Sedley was greatly puzzled how to act. She was glad to go home, and yet most woefully sad at leaving school. For 3 days before, little Mara Martin, the orphan, followed her about like a little dog. She had to make and receive at least 14 presents, to make 14 solemn promises of writing every week. Send my letters under cover to my grandpa, the Earl of Dexter, said Miss Saltire, who was, by the way, rather shabby. Never mind the postage, but write every day, you dear darling, said the impetuous and woolly-headed, but generous and affectionate Miss Swartz. And the orphan little Laura Martin, who was just in round hand, took her friend's hand and said, looking up at her face wistfully, "Amelia, when I write to you, I shall call you Mamma." All which details I have no doubt Jones, who reads this book at his club, will pronounce to be excessively foolish, trivial, twaddling, and ultra-sentimental. Yes, I can see Jones at this minute, rather flushed with his joint of mutton and a half pint of wine, taking out his pencil and scoring under the words foolish, twaddling, etc., and adding to them his own remark of, quite true. Well, he is a lofty man of genius, and admires the great and heroic life in novels. The great heroic in life and in novels. And so had better take warning and go elsewhere. Well then, the flowers and the presents and the trunks and bonnet boxes of Miss Sedley having been arranged by Mr. Sambo in the carriage, together with a very small and weather-beaten old crow skin trunk with Miss Sharp's card neatly nailed upon it, which was delivered by Sambo with a grin, and packed by the coachman with a corresponding sneer, the hour of parting came, and the grief of that moment was considerably lessened by the admirable discourse which Miss Pinkerton addressed to her pupil. Not that the parting speech caused Amelia to philosophize, or that it armed her in any way with a calmness the result of argument, but it was intolerably dull, pompous, and tedious, and having the fear of her schoolmistress greatly before her eyes, Miss Sedley did not venture, in her presence, to give away any ebullitions of private grief. A seed cake and a bottle of wine were produced in the drawing room, as on the solemn occasions of the visits of parents, and these refreshments being partaken of, Miss Sedley was at liberty to depart. You'll go in and say goodbye to Miss Sorry, let me say that again. You'll go in and say goodbye to Miss Pinkerton, Becky, Miss Jemima, to a young lady, of whom nobody took any notice, who was coming downstairs with her own bandbox. I suppose I must, said Miss Sharp calmly, and much to the wonder of Miss Jemima, and the latter having knocked at the door, and receiving permission to come in, Miss Sharp advanced in a very unconcerned manner, and in French with a perfect accent, Mademoiselle, je viens vous faire mes doux. Miss Pinkerton did not understand French. She only directed those who did, but biting her lips and throwing up her venerable and Roman-nosed head, on the top of which figured a large solemn turban, she said, Miss Sharp, I wish you a good morning. As the Hammersmith samurai spoke, she waved one hand both a way of adieu and to give Miss Sharp an opportunity of shaking one of the fingers of the hand which was left out for that purpose. Miss Sharp only folded her own hands with a very frigid smile and bow, and quite declined to accept the proffered honor, on which Samurai tossed up her turban more indignantly than ever. In fact, it was a light battle between the young lady and the old one, and the latter worsted. Heaven bless you, my child, she said, embracing Amelia and scowling while over the girl's shoulder at Miss Sharp. Come away, Becky, said Miss Jemima, pulling the young woman away in great alarm, and the drawing-room door closed upon them forever. Then came the struggle of parting below. Words refused to tell it. All the servants were there in the hall, all the dear friends, all the young ladies, the dancing master who had just arrived, and there was such a scuffling and hugging and kissing and crying with the hysterical youps of Miss Swartz, the parlor boarder, from her room as no pen can depict, and as such the tender heart would fain pass over. The embracing was over. They parted. That is, Miss Sedley parted from her friends. Miss Sharp had demurely entered the carriage some minutes before. Nobody cried for leaving her. Sambo of the Bandy Legs slammed the carriage door on his young weeping mistress. He sprang up behind the carriage. "Stop!" cried Miss Jemima, rushing to the gate with a parcel. "It's some sandwiches, my dear," she said to Amelia. "You may be hungry, you know. And Becky Sharp, here's a book for you that my sister, that is, Johnson's dictionary, you know. You mustn't leave us without that. Goodbye. Drive on. Drive on, coachman. God bless you." And the kind creature retreated into the garden, overcome with emotion. But lo! And just as the coach drove off, Miss Sharp put her pale face out of the window and actually flung the book back into the garden. This almost caused Jemima to faint with terror. "Well, I never!" said she. "What an audacious—" Emotion prevented her from completing either sentence. The carriage rolled away. The great gates were closed. The bell rang for the dancing lesson. The world is before the two young ladies, and so farewell to Cheswick Mall. Thank you very much. That concludes the end of Chapter 1 in Vanity Fair.